What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Kevin Moore Show. Now if you want to stay up to date with all my latest videos, just click that subscribe button below, as this really helps to support the show. Now if you're new to the show, I interview guests from a spiritual perspective, covering mainstream and alternative subjects and much more. Now on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Miguel Mendonça. Now, Miguel is an author based in Bristol, England, and he gained an honours degree in geography and history and studied social science and environmental ethics at a postgraduate level. Miguel has been on the show before, where we reviewed his books on Meet the Hybrids, Being with the Beings, We Are the Disclosure, and more. Now, on today's show, we'll discuss his latest book, Wisdom Now and Always, and Make Manifest, A Life in Art and Craft. So, Miguel, welcome back to the show.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm actually, happy to have you here, mate. And you've been on before, and I'll link your two previous interviews in the description below. Any books we mentioned, they'll be in the description below as well. So you've got two new books out, Make Manifest, A Life in Art and Craft, and Wisdom Now and Always. So when you last came on, we were talking about a lot of your disclosure work in the UFO kind of subjects, and sort of touched on channeling a little bit with some of the books that you had written. So I think that, you could have done maybe more books in the field of the paranormal, but I know, or esoteric, spiritual, whatever you want to call it. I know that you felt a bit burnt out because we had that sort of discussion off air as well. So, yeah, I mean, do you think that you could have done more on the subjects that you've covered before, or do you think it was time to have that change?
Well, I don't know. I mean, as I was saying,
I'm butting in here. I know people are going to hate me doing this, right? As I hold my coffee up, and when I say what I mean by that is that you could have done books on the mediumistic stuff, there was, just near death experience. You touched the channeling side, but you were just going to say that. Well, I don't think I could have done, but that was my point. There's so many areas that you could have looked into, no? Or were you not pulled in any of those ways?
Well, I thought where you were going with that was this sort of ET UFO.
Well, that's just one aspect of it. Yeah, but there's other areas, isn't there, that all this touches upon?
I mean, I felt that I had taken it as far as I could, in that I was interviewing channelers in Being with the Beings, and through them I was interviewing the beings they channel. And the only place you can go from there is to sit down with some beings themselves, and that is not likely to happen. I
Well,
have
yeah, because
not in.
you would have had to channel them then, wouldn't you? You would have had to.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about in terms of a physical 3D thing. I mean, sure, you could say that on the intuitive level that things come through, it comes through in dreams, it comes through in art, it comes through in different expressions. And yes, I think that that is a form of contact. I think that it happens.
I'm sorry to keep butting in here, right? But all
Mhm.
right, so you're not okay. Your primary beliefs right now. Do you feel that we're more than our body still? After all the work you've done all those years ago, do you still think that we're more than our body?
I think based on personal experience, everything that tells me that consciousness is not simply bound to the body. I mean, I had a wild near death experience in a basically what should have been a head on collision at cumulatively somewhere north of 100 miles an hour. And, you know, I found myself in a white space, totally undefined whiteness. And then I became aware of awareness, aware, oh, I'm Miguel, but I've got no body. And then I became aware that ahead of me and somewhat above me was an angel with the wings spread. And I have never seen anything more spectacular. Or, I mean, it's words fail me. It was just, I mean, I, my feeling was that just total agog. And then I kind of heard sound rushing backwards. And it's like I was sucked back into my body with a thud. And I realized, oh, okay, wait a minute. So we, I remember that we were nose to nose, bumper to bumper with this BMW. I could see the grill, and then suddenly everything's white. There's an angel there, and then I come back into the car, and there's no BMW. So was my life saved? I mean, what? I mean that, you know, the skeptics, the sort of hardcore materialists would say, it's just a blip, a flicker, a thing, or whatever. It's nothing. It's nothing. But when you go through it, and I've had other out of body experiences and
So that
all
was
sorts of
that was a
crazy things.
potential accident that turned out not to be an accident, but it was so realistic, the whole thing, that you cannot understand what was going on there. You can talk about it, but it doesn't make any sense what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I'm not religious, so
yeah.
I was always
Well, how long ago was that, Miguel? How
allergic.
long ago was that?
That was, I would say, 94 or 95
Okay,
for
okay,
sure.
okay. So some time ago, but it doesn't feel like it, does it? Um, okay. So with all the research that you've done, because you've interviewed a lot of people as well, and there are times when I've become burnt out in this field.
Mm.
Most definitely, especially with the Mark Richards documentary that I'm about to. Well, that's gone back into production, but that'll be my creative thing I'm doing soon. When it looks at
Mm.
people within the industry, just how corrupt people are, within this field, and just how much no discernment that we've got whatsoever.
Mm.
What do you feel about now you've had time to reflect back, and that you've not wanted to go back into this field? Do you feel that some of the people that you met on your journey were just not being true to what they were really doing, and that actually some of them were not genuine, and some were maybe?
Well, I think that there is no way of knowing, and you have got to make your peace with it. I think for other people, they will want to, just the way they're wired, they're going to want to get proof. I mean, that word would dog us throughout the production of Meet the Hybrids, because everybody, as soon as somebody says, I am part ET, someone says, prove it. How do you know? I mean, they might say it with absolute love, but these guys, well, I just happen to know from experiences I've had an entire lifetime of this, memories that resurfaced, experiences that I have every week. This is something I know about myself to my core. And then others, because we had a range of people in that book, so you can see where people are sort of early on in the process and feeling it out and saying that there's a bunch of things that lead me to suspect this is the case. But the fact is that neither you nor I can ever prove either way any of these things.
And do you think there's times when you just feel, oh, some portions of some of the stuff I did, maybe it wasn't, just maybe it wasn't, because it's just so far out of reality. But then, yeah, I'm not trying to get you to narrow down on anything. I'm just saying, the self-doubts that you have as time's gone on.
Well, as I said earlier, I think in some instances, it is as difficult to disbelieve it as it is to believe it. And I say that because what would need to be happening for this person to be lying, or are they just crazy? Are they deceived? Are they deluded? That is its own kind of universe of discussion in terms of all the ways that we can be inaccurate.
What about ego being a problem in now looking back? How much do you think ego plays a problem in maybe twisting the work sometimes?
I think if there's money involved, it's always possible. It's always possible. If somebody's livelihood depends on a character, on a story, it can start off as something very innocent. And I'm not talking about any of the people I've worked with, but when I look into the kind of wider pool of what was called ufology and still is, in some quarters, I am absolutely 100% sure that there is open deception, clear deception, where people are saying something they absolutely know is not true. And it could be that they see somebody over there making bank, and suddenly, because there's different levels, there's people who make nothing. There's people who make a small income. Then there's people who, I don't know. I have nobody's bank records. I don't know what anybody really makes. I don't understand that side of it well enough to have any real insight. But it certainly holds true, I think, in general, that people become almost a slave to their own identity, their own commercial identity, their identity as a commercial entity. And then that fire needs to be fed, because, you can only tell the same couple of stories so many times, and then eventually.
I was saying this off air to you, that there's a well-known channeler who has a what would you call it? I suppose a PR manager, or would you call it a manager? Let's just say a manager, right? And you've got to be up to a certain level, to making buck yourself to be able to afford a manager, right? So you're making some serious money, right? Serious in the sense of maybe not to some people making money, but in this field, right? Let's just say that, right? And they become like a gatekeeper. And all I wanted to do was I said to this person, I wasn't in the best of moods mentally, right? I wish now I hadn't sent the email, but part of me is glad I did, because I wanted to make it a bit more of a challenging interview, right? Because I'd asked this guy that I wanted to do an interview where we did a special offer, because, I just need to make some money right now as well. I need to do things that are making money for me as well, because I don't have a sponsor or anything like that. And it was a no straight away from them. And I suppose that got me riled a little bit. And I've done many interviews where it's just, I just feel like I'm just a bit of a yes man rather than, challenging in the interview sometimes. Not that I want to rip them a new arsehole, because I'm not after doing that. Do you know what I mean? And I was just told I was passive aggressive, and that the interview will not be taking place based on my previous interview. Which I guess if you read the email, maybe it came across as passive aggressive. But why can't we just talk about it? Do you know what I mean? Why can't, what's the issue with just saying, hey, look, wasn't having the best day that day. Let's just talk about it. No, cock blocked on the phone and everything else. Can only do it by email, which I find really impersonal anyway, right? And it just made me think. It made me think, which was a good thing, that, maybe they really don't want any things questioning. Maybe because there's been so much money for everyone that's being made, that cannot be debalanced in any way.
Well, I mean, you could not ask a more sensitive question of really any business at all, but especially in the spiritual, metaphysical. I mean, there are so many genius documentaries out there on people who may have begun with good intentions, let's say, and come from a pure place. There's that phenomenal documentary series called Wild Wild Country about Osho.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
I mean, top 10 documentary series of all
Amazing.
time for me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one about Bikram, the yoga dude, also on Netflix. I mean, I've listened to quite a number on of podcasts of different egomaniacs, lunatics, and they all get eaten alive by their own ego. That's the problem. Humans are. I mean, it is one of our worst vices. That when the ego gets involved, I mean, in the wisdom book, there's a great, really honest piece of sharing from Ruben Langdon, who you may know. Ruben, I mean, he films channelers. He has that great TV show.
I've met him once. He's a very nice guy from what I've.
Yeah, he's really sound. I mean, he's in Make Manifest as well, and his other life as a video game star, etc. And I think it's in Make Manifest, he talks about the trap of ego and what can start to happen when it gets fed, and how you can start screwing up if you have no internal gyroscope or compass. You don't balance yourself out internally. He said, I just had really good friends and business partners, people who were able to give him a reality check, bring him kind of to his senses a little bit. But he said that when he said that I had done this, he said that I had become the gopher for what's his name? I don't want to mispronounce it. A very famous Chinese martial artist, and he said, "I'd do anything for the guy." And he said that I found that as I built up a following through his work in video games, in particular, his acting, his running one of the world's most successful motion capture studios in LA. Yeah, ego is just a trap. It's just waiting for you. And, in my previous life, in my environmental work, as I developed, an international profile, I certainly let it get the best of me in ways I sure should not have done. So I have experienced a tiny bit of it. And so when you've been there, when you've experienced it, you become more sensitized to it and you start to recognize it. But when you're in the middle of it, how do you know?
Well, and how do you know, like, when, people in the field that I've been in for a while, and you have as well. Even though that you've moved away from it a little bit right now, even though we're having this conversation about this field still, right? How do you know when someone's work is just all narcissistic, or that not the work, but they are in a sense, or they're not coming from the right space? I mean, because they've only got a when you're at a low state, when you're looking for help, you're looking for answers. It all can sound fantastic sometimes, but how do you self-check? How do you become your own discernment meter? I suppose is it helpful? Does it connect? I mean, I've had readings with mediums before where it's fucking spot on. Excuse the French. It's so spot on, right? But maybe sometimes they're not. Depending where you are in the journey with them, or when you're having the next reading. I think no matter who you're seeking for help, but the only real person that can help you is yourself. And it's okay to get guidance, but really it's yourself that's going to make the final decisions. Even though if you had taken their advice, you would have been better off. But you've still got to, go through that. Maybe. Do you know what I mean? There's no wrong or right.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think I agree with that. That there really isn't any right or wrong. Again, it goes back to what Famika said about judgment. It's kind of useless unless all you're looking for in this life is experience after experience of judgment. And I try and avoid it with every cell in my body, because I am so aware of my flaws, or I'm aware of, you just feel it. I mean, I think, one of the most important things I ever did was do a degree, because I remember being super opinionated and just, basically pulling opinions out of thin air based on, very little. But the very first thing they taught us after the fire exits was, if you are going to even last a month in here to get in your first couple of assignments, the first thing you've got to learn is a little something about knowledge construction, that you have got to make a case. You've got to make an argument. You've got to build an argument based on a foundation of established knowledge, that you don't just go, oh, it's like this and this is how it is. So, and I, years later, I looked at something very similar in philosophy of science. I did a postgrad course in that, and that was another reminder of the difficulties of establishing knowledge about the world, about ourselves, what really is a fact. I mean, if you can get 10 scientific studies saying nuclear power is the safest, most efficient way to develop energy, period. And then you get guys, I'll just finish, on the other side, you've got guys saying, well, we've got 10 studies from other people saying it is the most expensive, the most wasteful, the most dangerous approach to energy. So, in other words, there's almost no level at which we are particularly good and confident when it comes to establishing truth. And, in a lot of ways, this is just a discussion about truth. It's basically one of those sort of philosophical underpinnings. It's one of those things that philosophically, at some point, you are going to wonder, what is real? I had a dream that was more real than my waking life. It contains so much truth and insight. How did I know that? Where did it come from? There's a level of truth that can be found there, or in your cat. It could be anything. And I feel like when you encounter truth, you really know it. And I think that we also know it when we run into bullshit. I think most people do have a somewhat developed bullshit detector. And it can just be easy, I guess, if you're around people who have a significant following and profile. And, you see this with cults all the time, that people end up just buying into groupthink. I did a year of reading books and studying cults. And, again, it's this idea of truth, but it's also about free will, discernment, and all the tools of manipulation that are used by cults and cult leaders to really rob somebody of their own discernment.
Okay, so what comes up for you if I say, how do you not judge others with stories that they've told you? For example, if I tell you about my UFO experience, I know it was true because I was there, but I can't prove that to anyone, except my family was with me as well. But if we told the story, there'll still be some that may not believe us. And there's a lot of whistleblowers in the sort of UFO contact genre whose stories probably can be shown, some of them to be not true. So, how can we, or how should we process the truth of other people and their stories, do you think?
Well, what comes up for me is, I think of, as you're talking, I thought of somebody just sat down to watch a movie, TV show, and they could get completely wrapped up in Rick and Morty. They know it's a cartoon. Yes, it's there to talk about truth, things that are true for the writers. In the performances, they may express some other level of truth. But nobody watching it thinks this is true. But it doesn't have to be. I mean, on that level, you could say that, say you come to me and say, Miguel, I just discovered that I'm actually a seventh dimensional Pleiadian, and my name is whatever, and my people look like such, and I did a regression or whatever, and now this is my deal. And so you're not really going to be able to have a conversation about anything other than this awakening. Now, to be on the other side of that, I am simply going to be there as a friend. I'm going to listen to where you're at with it, and I'm going to be in any way supportive. It doesn't mean I need to know it's true. I am certainly going to ask myself, is he over-investing? Is this somehow, is he just trying to, is it something to do with some other element in his life that he can't face and is heading for the Pleiades?
That is okay. Now that's a fucking good point, because that's what it comes down to, doesn't it? Some of this stuff is, we are all here to have this human experience. We shouldn't want to escape, even though it can be fucking difficult. Excuse my French. I know I'm swearing a lot here, but it can really be difficult sometimes, right? And we've all, we should want to see it through, right? I don't believe in suicide. I think there's just so much damage it leaves for all the people left behind, right? But I understand that people are can get into very dark places. But I think having this human experience, if this was something that we chose to come here for, my God, it must have been so important that we really wanted it so bad, right? And even if none of that was true, like, forget all that was even true, there's nothing after we die and all that, right? We're still here. And I think your point there you mentioned is if you're gonna put faith or trust into something, how much is it helping you to live a better present moment lifetime? I think that's what really it comes down to.
Yeah.
Right. How much loving you are going to be towards yourself and others. How much more beneficial you want to make your life towards others and yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be like hurting other people and creating destruction in people's lives. What service are you going to be to other people, no matter what you may be suffering from? Because we can all be of service in our own ways when we live our joy and live our passions, which we're going to talk about with the books that you've just been doing past all this stuff, right? But so when some of this information that we've been promoting, when it takes us away from the being here now, I think that can be a problem. You tell me what you think.
Well, I do think that absolutely everything in life, everything we've discussed ever, all boils down to what am I going to do now? For me, just the way I'm wired, I am a doer. I just want to, I've just got that kind of mind that can't be, I just can't sit around doing nothing. I always kind of need to do like at least often a couple of things at once if I can get away with it. But really, yeah, I mean, as long as people aren't hurting anyone and all the rest of it. So there's that level. If people, especially if it is taken them to a place they couldn't have got to in any other way. And I think a lot of people who pass through the whole cosmic thing and end up leaving it behind and just pursuing a more gentle philosophical and spiritual path, they still got something from it. It doesn't mean that whatever they read or believed at any given time, it doesn't have to be real or not real, in the same way that Rick and Morty doesn't have to be real for it to contain important lessons and opportunities.
And no addictions to anything neither, because we can soon get addicted to like, oh my God, am I going to turn left or right now? I better speak to my reader or my go-to person. I think it's helpful to have someone like that in your life, but not an addiction to it all the time.
I mean, like a lot of things, it could be a crutch for sure. That we can get so, if we have an identity, if we have goals, especially if we have an imposed set of expectations, well, dad's a dentist, you've got to be a dentist. But I really do want to design, anything, drones. I don't want to be a fucking dentist.
Right, yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like
whatever.
You can get to a place where you're so screwed up with issues around expectation, identity. This image you had, honestly, of where your life was meant to go,
it's
and
big
it's
over
not
here.
going there.
It's big over here. That type of thinking. Oh yeah, Oh yeah. Yeah, and people get trapped in that. And is it the happiest place to be sometimes? I don't know. But yeah, maybe at the end of their lifetime, they get to maybe really think that one through. And it'd be nice if we could do it at the beginning sometimes as well. Yeah. I think you, if you ever had kids, Miguel, I think you'd be one of those people that wouldn't push them to to do one thing or the other. It'd be like, what is it you really want to do, and that's based on things that you've learned in your life as well. With doing it from the right space.
I think I would have been very torn. I think I get the sense that a lot of parents are torn where it comes to boundaries and expectation, and well, maybe it's good that we push him or her, but I don't know, in the end, if you zoom out of this conversation far enough to a place where it's all up for grabs and nothing really counts, and there's infinite do-overs in an infinite universe, and you come and you screw around for a bit and you try this and try that and you succeed and you fail and you love and you hate and you try. But yeah, I mean, there's this overarching philosophy that says it all counts because all of it is fed into the superorganism source. It's fed back and we're all just fragments of source and that whole thing.
Yeah, and what if the truth of that was even more greater than we could even comprehend, and we call it what you just said there because others call it like that, and actually it's nothing like that. It's just so beyond that, but at the level that we're at right now, that just happens to be the way we can understand it, but it's not even that. What could be an understanding beyond that would make sense? I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm just one that tries to break free of thinking the way it is. Thinking barriers got us to this point. Could can we have? But it's impossible to have conversations beyond some things because we're not. It's just not. It doesn't go anywhere because there's no conversation.
Totally.
But
I mean, it's like, I mean, we could pick the example of and I know that people would instantly go, oh, he's so unevolved. Ants are really clued in and connected and they're blah, 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 blah. But, fucking bear with me. An ant trying to understand the Large Hadron Collider, I mean, for us, I've spent all my life, certainly since the age of 3, when I encountered this invisible presence, that I knew immediately from that moment that reality was structured in a far more complex way, that there's so much unseen, that there are levels of existence that we can sense, but we can't perceive with the physical senses.
Let me reel you back in then. So, just before because we're going to get into your books now as well, your 2 latest books. But okay, then very quick review. Then after having some time away from the work that you were doing in that field, in the spiritual stuff, where are you now? Do you think after having this conversation?
Right now it is just all about music. That is a level of flow state and a happy place that absolutely nothing else can really touch, even though I am feeling now the first stirrings of that desire to start sitting people down again for a couple of hours at a time with a bunch of questions and letting them have at it, because there's stuff I want to know about sufficiently that it could be. I'm gonna make some very early approaches and reach out to a couple of people, and because they would have to be in it. So if they say yes or no, that is my get out.
Okay, so let's move this interview over to your 2 latest books now, which are Make Manifest, A Life in Art and Craft, and then Wisdom Now and Always. So you went from books on environmental ethics to, interdimensional contact to, to the books that you're doing now, which is a different direction for you, right?
Yeah, I didn't see it, even though I was there, as somebody in one of my recent books, Make Manifest, said to me, it's this one, although I don't know if it'll just be vanished by the background. Anyway,
we'll put it on screen.
It's a book about art and creativity, which is the one I did after Wisdom. And I interviewed this guy, Mike Hall. I'm a massive fan, to the point of a total geek, about this show called Rust Valley Restorers on Netflix. It's about a bunch of cats in British Columbia who do car restoration, anti-car restoration. And it's I'm just sort of semi-obsessed with the show. I mean, it's so feel good, and it expands you. It takes you into, Stephen King once said that there was always this amazing fascination on the part of his readers for any information they could get on a character which took them into their specialism, their expertise. So, for example, in Misery, I'm going to go down so many kind of diversions here. You'll have to reel me back to the original point. But he said that people love it when you give them information about what somebody does for a living, because it often, educates them about an aspect of life they knew nothing about, they had no involvement in. And so I think that's part of the fascination with Rust Valley Restorers. but it's also this group of people and the crazy lives that they live. And anyway, so Mike, his main work is kind of demolition work, and he has this company that's very successful, that does what do they call it now? Rock slope stabilization. So if you have so they got a huge contract with Canadian Rail, where you've got like valleys. You've obviously got the threat of rock falls. So what they do is they go up and they stabilize the slope, right? So they use mesh, they spray on concrete, spraycrete or whatever it's called, and they'll fell trees, whatever they need to do to stabilize that slope. So that's what he did, and they were going to make a show about that, but instead they ended up making a show about the fact that in his backyard in a field he had 400 rutting hulks of old classic cars.
I know exactly the show you're talking about. I got addicted to that show. I just want to interject that.
Yeah, blast.
Yeah.
So I interviewed not only him but Matt Shuchuk, one of the co-producers and directors.
Oh, you interviewed these people for the latest book. All right.
Well, Make Manifest, yeah. So Matt, the director, producer.
So hang on. Hang on. You got addicted to this show, with the premise of what it was showing, and you actually interviewed these people and you put them in this book.
Yeah, I had. In fact, I think that's part of the inspiration for the book. I was watching this and I would just love what they do so much. I thought, how can I help them? What could I possibly do? And it's just started things ticking in my brain. And I thought, well, I mean, I would love to pin them down for an interview. So people watching this, go watch that show on Netflix immediately.
We've just been putting some still pictures up on the screen of this show, and we're going to link that show in the description below, because I think it's available worldwide. I think it is on Netflix.
Yeah,
pretty sure it is.
It's on that, and it's on the History Channel.
Okay. So hang on a minute. Let me get this right. So you're watching these guys on this show, and then inspired to from what perspective are you inspired to do what? You wanted to help them in any way you could, and you do this book on. Hold the book up one more time. The book on arts and crafts. Is that what it is?
It's on art and creativity.
Art and creativity. I'm so sorry. Art and creativity. And what were some of the questions you asked? Because this guy's this guy. What's the main lead character's guy in the show again?
Mike.
Yeah,
Mike, the tall dude with the dreads.
That's right, with the dreads. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so he was very obliging to want to be part of this book as well.
Well, he was pretty tough to get hold of, but I was actually interviewing Matt Shuchuk, sat right here on Zoom, and Mike called as we were talking about the show. And so Matt just said, oh, hey, I'm just being interviewed by this guy, Miguel, in England. Say hi. So he held up the phone and I said, hey, Mike, huge fan of the show. We're doing an interview about the show and about Matt's career and how he got there. And would you oblige me with an interview? And, basically, I mean, how do you say no? And so we did an interview like a month later, and the thing that he said that sparked all this, talking about the show and his life and all of the crazy twists and turns and bumps and ruffles of that, he said, I don't watch the show because I've lived it and I don't need to relive it. So he's somebody who, like, when we'd done that interview, you and I, that's what comes up for me when you say, what was it about? I think, well, I just, I do stuff, I move on, I'm doing the next stuff. And, but, when you do this kind of work and you interview these kinds of people, there are so many times each day when little things just come back to you, because in the interviews we go deep into whatever it is. So for Make Manifest, we talked about, so I mean, I have such a crazy range of people. I mean, I'll reel off a few, not all of them. So Kerry Barber.
And these are people in the Make Manifest book.
In the book, yeah. So Kerry Barber is a tattoo artist, has been at it over 40 years, has won pretty much everything you can win. In fact, she has the oldest still running tattoo shop in the US, LA. Yeah. I just like their work. Yeah, so it's about living a creative life. It's about living a successful creative life. So in order to dig into that, we have to get into what is it that people struggle with, and that could be anything. That could be developing knowledge, developing technique, developing audience, developing markets, developing opportunities, developing relationships, developing concepts. And it might even be leaving behind one art form for another. So these guys, I mean, we talked about creative blocks, and everyone has their own attitude. What's so fascinating about having 15, 20 questions and asking those 15, 20 questions to 20, 25 people, something like that, is that you get this fabulous range of responses. And one of them, Formica Coriandolo, an Italian lady at Damanhur, this spiritual artistic community in northern Italy, she said, well, I don't really get creative blocks, because she said, I think that when you get creative blocks, you're coming more from your thoughts than from your imagination. And she made a distinction between them. And she also talked about the fact that in the work that they do, which was to basically illegally excavate 150 feet underground and build these incredible temples to humankind as they're known, is that in that work, this community, they all do it together. Everyone learns together. There's no judgment. She said, eliminating judgment is one of the foundational routes to success in art. She said, judgment is completely useless. It serves no purpose whatsoever in developing as an artist, as a creator of any kind. I mean, it's like, she talked about childbirth a lot as a mother. She talked about what it is to bring life into the world and that as the ultimate creative act. And she was talking about the fact that in childbirth, she said it's like you're in a storm, the eye of a storm, and the subject, I think, was the effort, the effort that goes into creativity. And she said, but the ultimate effort is childbirth, but you go through all of that pain and all of that discomfort and challenge, and when you're done, the result makes all the pain evaporate. The result is nothing compared to the effort to get there. And I think that goes for a lot of creative people. It may be an enormous undertaking to produce whatever, but the results in general, if you like it, if you continue working until you like it, it just makes all that effort sort of evaporate. I mean, one of the guys is a sculptor, Corin Johnson, and the average person would look at his work starting off with a slab of marble about the size of a car and think, how on earth could you possibly do it? Starting off with this little chisel and hammer and you start with this block of stone. How could you have the guts and determination to see it through? I mean, one of the most interesting things in his chapter was all of the stories he shared, and there were numerous, where he had been pushed to the absolute deadline, often because he got let down by people that he had, like a whole team flew out to Italy to work on a project. And he said half or most of them just kept vanishing on holiday. So he just got left to do a lot of the work by himself. And he said it's just untold the amount of times that he's been left there working up until the shippers come to take the sculpture to the exhibition, and they could be flying it to another country, but there's no telling them, look, I need another 3 weeks. It's you just, you go without sleep, you just crack on until it's done. And every single chapter, every individual, there's so many stories that are not just great insights and examples for art and creativity, but I think rules for living.
And what are some of those rules, do you think? If there was a commonality between some of them, or?
I think there's many. One of them, I think, is if you think of the difference between a successful artist and an unsuccessful artist, I think the most fundamental requirement is determination, dedication, that you will not take no for an answer, that you will just keep working. You will not roll over. I mean, you may hang it up for the day, you may walk away from it for a year, but you keep coming back and you get the job done. And for those guys, I think maybe that's a key differentiator between, if you like, a true artist and somebody who maybe is not as invested, is not as naturally not just artistic, but an artist, because you can be artistic and not be an artist. You know what I mean? You can have the talent, but not the inclination. But for those that have both, they also have this absolute determination. It is what they are. There really is no way to avoid seeing it through, because they're wired that way. I mean, some people are wired to be nurses, caregivers. Some people are wired to have the biggest family they can have. In their minds, 6 kids is the number. That's the magic number, and they will not be happy. They will do anything they have to do to get to that magic number. And I don't have children, but it's amazing how many people have told me, I knew since I was 15 that I wanted 3 kids, 4 kids, whatever. So I think when people are just wired for something, they're just going to get there.
And how many times, with these people that you interviewed, and how many altogether do you think, or a rough figure of people that you interviewed for the final book?
It's about 2 dozen.
2 dozen, right?
About 2 dozen.
Yep. How many had changes they went through for their craft? I mean, there must have been a number that started off with, this is what I want to do, but actually where their life went was completely different in some respects.
I don't think there were many.
Really?
I think, yeah, I don't think so. I mean, these are really, yeah. I mean, one guy was, and this is a curious story to me. There's one guy, David Hearn. He just won last year the Lucy Award for documentary photography. So that's like the Oscars of photography. And so he's been a war photographer for decades. And he also did, a huge amount with, celebrities and so forth. Like you can find, him doing, I mean, look him up, David Hearn, H-U-R-N. I mean, he hung out with the Beatles a lot. He basically knew everybody, it seems. He's one of those guys, right place, right time. But where he got started is he was dyslexic. So academically, he wasn't where he would have liked to have been in school, but he ended up going to Sandhurst Military College to train to be an officer, an army officer. And while he was in the officers' mess, he came across a magazine, and I forget the name of it, but it was pretty well known in photography circles, I think. And the photo that he saw that changed his life, and by extension those of many other people who have encountered him and his work, and people who he may have helped define in terms of the imagery that he created around that person. But that photo that changed it all for him was of a Russian military officer, I think it was, buying his wife a hat in a department store in Russia. And he started crying. And he said, this is not something you typically do in the officers' mess at Sandhurst. But the reason that it set him off was that his father had been in, I think, the First World War. And when he came back, the first thing that he did, unless it's World War II, and if it is, forgive me, David, but, my maths are not great. So when his father came back from the service, the first thing he did, they lived in Cardiff, and the first thing he did was he took his wife to Howell's, a very famous department store. I think I bought a pair of mountain boots there once. And his father took his wife there and bought her a hat. And that was the first thing that he did when he got back from the service. And David said that up until that point, they were so full of propaganda about the Russians that they were dehumanized. But that one image of something so personal to him changed it all. And he said from that moment, it was all about photography. He went to London. He started selling shirts in Harrods. He got himself, I think, a wind-up Bolex camera. And at that time, late 50s, early 60s, all the right people were there. So he shared a house with Peter O'Toole and others, for example. And all of these people, so they're poets and playwrights and filmmakers and ballet dancers and artists of every stripe, and they would get together in the cafes. He said you had a pub culture for a certain group of people, certain group of artists, and cafe culture for the others. And so he was of the cafe culture type, and he just took photographs all the time. And he said one of the most important things he learned is that talkers talk and doers do. So, those groups will hang out together. People who just want to talk about stuff rather than do it will get together and talk about stuff. But the doers will do stuff, and they will get together and show each other, I've done this, I've done that, and inspire each other. And so David pursued a wide variety of forms of photography, as I say, from portraiture and his work in war photography.
Let me just pause you there a minute, Miguel. Because I know we've got so much to talk about, and I know this has been your life for a little bit here right now. Let me just ask you just to get to the point on this one, and then because I know we've got to move on for this interview. So just go from where you was.
So essentially, the point is that for somebody who is creative, somebody who finds a passion, whatever that might be, that it will evolve. So David had gone from seeing that image to developing through all varieties of photography into when COVID struck and he was stuck at home, he began to set himself a new challenge of, could I become a decent real estate photographer. So he taught himself the techniques of real estate photography just as a as an artistic challenge and nothing more. So the point is that if you are artistic, if you love what you do, over a long enough time horizon, you are in all likelihood going to continually develop your craft into all kinds of different places to challenge yourself, to pursue the muse,
Okay.
whatever it may be.
And which is kind of what you've done. Let's just reverse this into yourself right now. Okay, so when I first met you, you were doing books on people who had extraterrestrial sort of ET experiences, and channeled information from that perspective. Now, obviously, then those books continued. They varied in content, and now obviously it's moved. It then moved to Wisdom Now and Always, which we'll talk about as well, and then into this latest book. So you're always writing, but the content isn't always the same.
Yeah,
Is that an expression of it? Maybe, do you think, or?
Well, I guess I'm somebody who just has lots of different interests and fortunately has the capacity to pursue them, in whatever realm. And like at the moment, my whole life is modular synths and just making electronic music. And again, like David, that continually warps and morphs into different expressions. And I've, have a YouTube channel so people can check out some of that. And some of that
we'll have to link that below. Yeah, okay.
Sure.
I'll make sure we do. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of that I make the excuse of, well, it's kind of bookwork because I take audio and I set that to music and I create a performance on the modular and upload that. Because, I learned an enormous amount from other people who were out on YouTube putting on demos, tutorials, performances, and I want to pay something back.
Okay, so it's kind of the same thing in a sense. So going back to the guy who was the famous guy from that TV show. I do not remember the TV show. I do not remember. The car thing. Mike, right? What were some of the things that he had learned? Because obviously, it's interesting. You were saying that on his TV show, it was going to be about one thing, for example, but actually it turned out to be something that was about his backyard and his passion for restoring old cars. So how did those two fit? Do you know what I mean? What did he have to say in a sense about that?
Well, I mean, essentially they had to twist his arm and say, well,
the cars were more interesting.
Thing. yeah. I mean, we can't do your demolitions work and all that. That Canadian Rail said you cannot have people filming TV shows by high-speed trains. No. So this TV company, production company said, well, what about these cars of yours, Mike? And they twisted his arm and they said, however the deal came together, and I don't know the nuts and bolts, but essentially they made him an offer and he accepted it.
Where does that fit into the creative side of it, though? I mean, into the book. Where is the connection between what?
Well, what I think is interesting about Mike is that he said, "I'm not an artist. He said that there are some guys, like if you've seen the show, you've seen that guy, is his name JF Lanier, something like that. So JF does those wild custom jobs that he entered in that huge show. Is it the Detroit Motor Show? I forget. Anyway, it's whatever is the biggest one. He entered that, and you can see that there is the artistic flair because they take a car and they say, all right, we're going to do a whole reimagining of this. We're going to take a chassis and we're going to go crazy. And it could be anything at all. Whereas with Mike, he said that I fell in love with these cars when I was a teenager, and it was the height of the muscle car era. Those are the cars that were brand new. They were on the lots, they were driving up and down the street. So when I see a rusting piece of junk in some guy's field, what I see is that car rolling down the street in 1973, whatever it was. And he said, that's the vision that I have. Like his son, Connor, he is, younger generation. He has a different spin on it. He might want to add more flavor. He might want to go for, fat tires and God knows what else, and do his own subtle bit of not reimagining, but bringing it more into a modern era. And Michael do that with the superstructure kind of thing. He will bulk it up. He will add in maybe, better brakes and things of that sort. But for him, he said, I'm not really creative. Like all I'm trying to do is recreate. But I look at that from the outside, and I can only see something creative there, even though you're trying to restore it to literally the shade of paint that was on that car when it launched. I see that as you've taken something that is just, to me, you've seen the show. I mean, they do not look savable.
No. It's fantastic. Yeah. So, okay. And does this come down to sort of like manifestation, that all these people that you interviewed, that there was no sort of set outcome on what they were trying to do with their lives in a sense, but it was they made sure that they manifested everything that they were doing. They put all their effort into it, and they saw it through. They didn't just start and stop something and not see it through. And they also were able to manifest the things that they wanted in their lives as well, do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of it is someone else's vision. So it could be the original car maker. Mike is going to go for their vision. His son Connor has his own vision. So you've seen the show, they have a tug of war over that. But then someone like Corin Johnson, the sculptor I mentioned, so he's done work for Westminster Abbey. He's done work for many other churches. He did a very famous chapel at Oxford University. And that stuff, there is no freestyling. Here's what this needs to look like, and he's going to make that. But that to him is satisfaction. Whereas somebody else might come to him and say, like he did this memorial to slavery, and I don't know the story. I don't know if they said, what do you think? I don't know if he was required to come up with some creative input. Then you've got people like Pete Lord, who his studio, Aardman here in Bristol, has won multiple Oscars due to Nick Park's work with Wallace and Gromit. And Pete, he did Morph. Now, you're English. You're not that far from me in age. You must remember Morph, the little plasticine dude. So it blew my mind. I had no idea he made Morph. I mean, I said to him, man, it's like it's 1978, like that. As soon as someone says the word Morph, it's incredible what that does. And for him, yeah, so he has a sketchbook, and he will just sketch Morph, and he might just be, his mind may be just drifting and, just in that sort of relaxed flow state. And he might draw Morph ice skating and think, okay, ice skating, what's there? And dive into the possibilities of ice skating. And then it starts to develop. And so all his movies, like he directed Pirates, that was won by the studio. And then there's somebody like Lady Pink. So Lady Pink is called the first lady of graffiti. So she was there pretty much at the birth of graffiti in New York in the end of the 70s. And she said, well, I do different kinds of work these days. Back in the day, you can see her in that awesome movie from the time called Wild Style. So back in the day, it was all totally illegal, extremely dangerous for multiple reasons. But today, she said, I do art for myself, and nobody has to know what it means. Nobody can tell me what to do, how to do it. I'm just going to do my thing. But then somebody somewhere else may say, we would like you to come to wherever and paint a mural, and it's got to depict this. And these are the people from the community, and this is the boardwalk, whatever it is. And here are the components. And she's going to take that and put that together. So for creative people, there's two very different things. There's the ability to realize someone else's vision, and then there's the ability to realize your own. And I think both have their own challenges.
Yeah, and I suppose it's being able to make a living from it and to be able to provide for yourself as well, which is a big thing for a lot of creative people. Okay, so I mean, how would you summarize the book then? I mean, what are we going to learn? What did you learn from it? Do you think, without giving too much away? I mean, what is the what is the reader gaining from it? Do you think?
Well, there's a lot. I'll try and give you a couple of bullet points. One is that I think absolutely everything that takes place is a creative act. Everything has creative aspects to it. And just by virtue of what we are going to do whatever we do in a unique way. We're going to put a twist, a spin on things. The point there is that nobody should doubt that they have creative energy, that they have creative talent. They just got to get there. So it might be that they have to experiment for years before they suddenly realize, man, my thing's clay. My thing's acrylics. My thing is remaking clothes from scraps I find. Mine is wallpaper designs. It could be anything, but people either through luck or because they go to art school, whatever, they're going to get introduced to a form that works for them. So I would say that's one of them, that I think everybody is creative and they should never be put off thinking, oh, I can't draw, therefore I'm not artistic. Because it could be music. I mean, there's a whole bunch of musicians in here and people who make music technology. I mean, Dave Smith is in this book. So Dave is one of the pioneers of synthesizers. He created the Prophet 5, which is one of the top 5 most famous, most influential synthesizers of all time. So again, it could take absolutely any form.
Maybe we should also move on to just the other book as well, The Wisdom Now and Always. Is there anything else you want to add to this most recent book that you think is important?
Well, if I had to pick one, I would say that ultimately I think that art and creativity is about developing self-knowledge, that the pursuit of artistic expression in whatever form that happens to be, you are going to learn something about yourself. It could be learning that maybe you're not a very patient person and you need to work on that. Maybe it's about learning to work with other people better because you've got to collaborate and you've got to get better. Maybe it's about learning to articulate your work to an audience. And maybe you realize you struggle to articulate. And there's a few people in the book that feel that that's an area they struggle in, but you look at the quality of their work and that is world-class. All of these guys are world-class. So I think one of the most important things is just not to put pressure on yourself with whatever you do creatively. Enjoy it. It's therapeutic. It's important as a channel to move things. Well, it can, but we can get a lot of stuff that just gets stuck in our heads. We, as a species, I think we suffer from overthinking, being too stuck in the mental. And art, especially when you get into that real relaxed flow state, time vanishes. When I'm making music, time does all sorts of weird things. It shrinks, it expands. And ultimately, I think that art and creativity, if you find a means of expression, whatever that is, don't judge it, find the time for it. It's worth it. Enjoy it, and let it be. Let it be whatever it needs to be.
That's an important message. Thank you for sharing that as well. Now, obviously, before that book, there was Wisdom Now and Always, and again, you had a number of contributors towards that book. If you were to somewhat summarize Wisdom Now and Always, how would you summarize that book?
Oof. Again, that's a challenge. I think the number one thing that I came away with about wisdom is its nature, that I was trying to move to a definition of wisdom, because a lot of people would think, yeah, I kind of know what wisdom is, or it's like pornography, you know it when you see it, even if it's tough to define. When does something stop being art and become pornography? Where is that line? And I think with wisdom, I think it can be blurry. When I went into it, I had an open mind. I didn't prejudge it. I just asked a bunch of people that are, again, all highly accomplished, some that I knew before, I'd worked with in my environmental work. And I was just blown away by their being, just who they are and how they act in the world, and generally not for their own benefit, other than be the change you wish to see in the world. But in the end, I think where I got to is that I felt that wisdom ultimately is, I could call it maybe benevolent intelligence. So it's acting intelligently, but you could say that a sociopath is intelligent. They're incredibly good at what they do, at manipulation, at playing the long game, at gaslighting. There's amazing things that they are capable of, but I don't look at them and say that they are wise people. I think that intelligence that is cultivated, not just benign, but benevolent, I feel that that is wisdom. But wisdom also, importantly, the way that I think about it, it has insight, where people, again, you could say, well, is it possible that there's a kind of dark wisdom that, again, a sociopath may have a kind of dark wisdom in that they have intelligence, that they have insight, they have a way of understanding how people tick. But I feel that wisdom always stands apart from darkness. I just do. People can read the book, come to a completely different conclusion, but that was my sense. Many people in the book referenced this new understanding that's developed about the plants kingdom, where in root systems, mycorrhizal systems, you have information traveling through these networks. So if part of that network is starving for enough water, enough nutrition, these other plants, the other parts of the network, are able through the root systems to send what that plant needs. And you could say it's benevolence. You could say that ultimately everybody wins, in the fact that if you start to get die-off in a woodland, for example, that die-off can increase the drying out of the woodland. It can change the kind of hydroscape of that, the hydrological environment. And so you could say, yeah, there's an argument that it's self-serving, but ultimately everybody wins. And, you know, a certain type of person would, you know, they'd struggle. You know, they would think, well, that's just kind of socialism for plants. Well, if it's good enough for them, well, why can't we help each other? I mean, part of the reason that I wanted to pursue the subject is it was born in 2020, and all that was on the news is Trumpism and QAnon and Black Lives Matter, and people absolutely everywhere freaking out and trying to dig in and maintain the old status quo in whatever new guise. And so you had things like Black Lives Matter really digging its heels in and trying to communicate. And then, you, of course, you know, the right freaks out about these people and, you know, and about Antifa and tries to call them terrorists and all the rest of it. But to me, it's like that plant kingdom. It's like if anyone suffers, everyone suffers. That's my feeling. And maybe that's just more a spiritual take on it, that it's not just about the practicalities. To me, wisdom is at its core love. I think a wise act is a loving act, and vice versa. And, you know, people can make up their minds about their own minds about that and about me and my take on it. And, well, he's just a hippie or an idealist or whatever. But love is love. I really think that that's the answer.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
It sounds very simple, not always easy to do to oneself or others. Sometimes it's not you know, we're always struggling with that, aren't we? Well, I am.
Well, I think that self-love is, it's an interesting point you raise, because that is, for some people, you know, this is wild spectrum, right? I mean, on one end, you've got somebody with absolutely no love for themselves at all, no self-respect, no self-care, no dignity left, nothing. You know, they're just done. And then right up the other end, you know, you have, you know, the psychotic level of narcissism, the Trumps and these guys, the despots, the people who, I mean, I was watching this documentary a couple of days ago on John DeLorean, and at the beginning, you know, you have this idea that, well, he made this cool car, you know, it's a gift to the world. But then you know, no spoilers, or, well, huge spoilers. So put your fingers in your ears, mute if you don't want to know where that story goes. But the people who knew him best shared stories about cutting corners, being obsessed from childhood with money, that he grew up in a dysfunctional family and a father an alcoholic, all kinds of major problems in the household. And a school friend one day invites him over, and he lives in like a mansion. And John saw this house and thought, this is this is going to be me. I'm having this. I'm going to manifest this. And, you know, that turned into a whole wild ride of misadventures and missteps and people getting screwed over. So, you know, some people would say, well, some people would say, well, he was a wise guy and a wise guy. But, you know, I Yeah, he was a wise guy, but not a wise man.
I understand. What were some of the? I mean, obviously, like I say, how many people did you interview? I was going to say they're 19, but I think it was a bit more than that, wasn't it? Or was it less than
I
that
think it's
actually?
23,
23.
I
Okay,
think.
great number.
Yep.
With what was
Hmm.
the most important bit of wisdom do you think that somebody shared with you in this book?
Ooh, I mean, do you know the first one that I always think about was the first interview in the book, Professor Filatusi Avogalio Jr. So he is Samoan. He's descended from Samoan warrior king lineage, and he's now a professor in at a university in Hawaii. I forget the name, but one of the other ladies in the book, Elizabeth Sartoris, she also teaches at the same place, and I'd known her before. And I said, "Look, is there anybody else I should interview for this book?" And she said, "Tusi, Professor Falatusi Avogalio Jr., wisest guy I know. He's a must-have. I'll set it up." We got in touch, and it was one of those experiences I'll never forget. And one of the stories he gave me, which is the first story I think about when I think about this book every time, is in Samoa. They had, the I think it's the Americans had, you know, essentially kind of begun to dominate the culture somewhat. And my history of this is non-existent, but my sense is that the incomers had outlawed the traditional tatau, where they have the bone comb and the mallet, and they make the tattoo in the most painful way I can possibly imagine. I mean, I have like 30 or 40 hours of tattooing, but I would not fancy that method. So anyway, he decided for himself he wanted to do this. He goes along, they find a guy, there's a very famous guy. Again, I'm afraid I forget his name, but in secret they do this tattooing, and he said the moment came when he was tattooing the patch of skin between testicles and anus with a comb made of bone, as sharp as it gets. And he said, this absolutely took him to another realm. The pain was so intense. Now he said there was a bifurcation at that point. There was a fork in the road. One fork, he could say, enough, I'm done. However, that would mean not just the pain stops, but another kind of pain starts, because you can't restart the tattoo. It can't be done. So an unfinished tattoo will be worn not just by you, but by all your descendants, all your family. It's a great shame will be upon you and everyone you care about. So at that moment, you have to decide, do I give up my pain and essentially transfer my pain to them? Or do I somehow bite down and get through this in order that I don't bring that upon them? And he said, everything I know about wisdom, he said, I felt I encountered every dimension of it in turn through that experience. And yeah, I mean, I've been there when, I had one session on my back where the pain, I was tripping out. I mean, I was literally starting to hallucinate. And I asked the guy 3 times to stop, but he was playing some techno or something so loud, and it was just me and him in the room, that he couldn't hear me. And I just kept having to go through it. But I mean, it doesn't compare. But I understand a bit about when you're taken to that place of you're so desperate for it to stop, but there's something that's dragging you through. And so if I think about wisdom, I think about the courage of convictions, the physical courage, the philosophical courage, all those levels of courage that it took in order for him to do something that ultimately would benefit him. And he said in years following, that more and more people like him were going back to essentially reclaim their heritage. And he said over time it started to shift, and eventually it was decriminalized as such. Anybody could get tattooed. And of course, after that, it absolutely took off, and those styles you find around the world. But it's people like him being willing to go through it that made that possible for the rest of us.
One question I've got for you as well, actually, is do you think we can have multiple creativity at the same time, or do you think it's not at the same time, but, there's multiple things that we want to do, isn't there? But do you think we're able to see through all those ideas, or are some just passing ideas that we'll never see through?
I think it's all of the above.
Mm.
I mean, I have so many things that I want to do creatively, and it, in the end, is a bit of wisdom. The wisdom to recognize that, and again, you could argue, well, this is just smart. It's not wise. If you're saying wise is benevolent and loving, then this is just good sense. That ultimately you have to prioritize effectively. It's, people might say, follow your highest joy, your highest passion, your highest excitement. What is the thing that is in your face? It just keeps nagging, keeps coming back to you. I mean, sometimes you think about an idea so much that you start to get a kind of synesthesia. You'll be thinking, it'll be in the back of your mind somewhere, and it influences the way you watch a movie. For example, it starts to shape the way that you experience the world. And at a certain point, I think it might just be, it's got to come out. You have to get it done, because you know that it will never let you go. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, Miguel, how do people find out more information about you and the work that you've done?
Well, you can stick the website in the description. It is miguelmendonça.com, and that has my books on. That's just the site for the books, really. And then my YouTube channel is Make Manifest, and you can put the link there in the description too. And that is just a bunch of modular mayhem and a few other projects, and there's some stuff from the ET books in there, and people singing light language and me setting that to music, and so that whole thing is going to evolve. But anyway, it was great to have a catch up.
Listen, Miguel, thank you so very, very much for coming on.
It's my pleasure, always.